imposing a jarring bit of the modern age on Vienna's old city. Most of the reporters had been there as long as we had, and they could sense in the past few days that the two sides' intensity had picked up, our updates having become vaguer as we edged closer to our final positions. They were counting down to a historic deal to, quote, keep the mullahs from getting the bomb, unquote, according to the New York Times. They weren't the only ones waiting. On July 27th, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, still on crutches from falling off his bicycle in Geneva a month before, had flown in to meet his Iranian counterpart, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who himself had just arrived from a quick visit to Tehran, where, it was believed, he'd gotten clearance from the supreme leader to finalize the deal. On their heels came the foreign ministers of the other world powers, known as the P5+1, who would be involved in the deal. Wang Yi of China, Laurent Fabius of France, Frank Walter Steinmeier of Germany, Sergei Lavrov of Russia, Philip Hammond of the United Kingdom, and Federica Mogherini of the European Union, all wanting to be on hand in case the end was as close as it looked. For all the excitement, the agreement was still a tangle of interlocking issues: how to verify Iran's compliance, how to best limit numbers and types of centrifuges, how to, quote, snap back, unquote, economic sanctions should Iran fail to live up to the agreement. None of these issues could be solved independently of the others. When one element of the deal was changed, everything else had to be recalculated, and everyone had to be consulted. Then the new information had to be brought to our P5+1 partners and often renegotiated, then back to the Iranians to hash over the same points again. Besides diplomats and technical experts, we had legal opinions from batteries of government lawyers. One session, in the final month-long gauntlet at the Coburg, went from early evening until 3 a.m. as two sets of lawyers clashed over every word of a single passage. The best way to describe the negotiation was as the world's most complex and consequential Rubik's Cube. The more you twisted one side to line it up, the more the other sides needed fixing. No single part of the deal is done until it's all done, I'd tell the press when they asked about what issues were still outstanding. I used the Rubik's Cube comparison so many times, in fact, that one of the technical experts on our team designed his own version, with key phrases from the talks on each colored square. It was such a hit that I had several of them made as keepsakes for members of the team, one of which now sits as an artifact of the negotiation in the Diplomacy Center at the State Department. When the June 30 deadline passed without a deal, we had extended it. A few more days turned into a week. Then as 1 week turned into 2, the pressure inside the Coburg cranked higher and higher. The ministers milled around the halls and conference rooms with their squads of aides, unhappy to be stalled here in Vienna, quietly resenting the fact that nothing would be final until Kerry, and President Obama back in D.C., said it was, and not quite understanding why we still hadn't reached a deal. It's not a stretch to say that Vienna, for all its illustrious history as a diplomatic city, had never seen a negotiation quite like this one. Our spell at the Coburg had already broken records, the longest sustained international deliberations, the longest an American Secretary of State, or an Iranian one for that matter, had spent in one place. A dialogue that had begun at the United Nations in 2002 as an effort to convince Iran to stop enriching uranium to weapons-grade purity had transmogrified into an entrenched confrontation between the revolutionary government in Tehran and the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the aforementioned P5 plus Germany, the +1. Convened by the High Representative of the European Union, the P5+1 talks had become, by the time we reached the Coburg, a de facto bilateral negotiation between Iran and its nemesis, the United States.